So I'm just going to be talking about some conspiracy theories right now. Just going to see if anyone comes in and starts watching or anything. Then I'll just start talking. Just waiting here, see if anyone's going to start watching or not. Nothing so far. Alright, so I'm just going to start talking. One of the things that really gets on my nerves is the conspiracy theories that surround the biblical God. And one big one, probably the biggest one in particular, is that it's the conspiracy theory that talks about God being hello, Violet Lavender. One particular one that I'm going to talk about right now is probably the biggest thing that surrounds the biblical deity, is this conspiracy theory that there's a race of beings called Anunnaki, which is based on the Sumerian deities that are called Anunnaki. It's a conspiracy theory that calls them aliens that came from a undiscovered planet in the solar system called Nibiru, or Planet X. And supposedly God is one of these beings. By most conspiracy theorists that talk about this, they think that's Enlil. First off, where did they get the idea that there's a planet in the solar system called Nibiru? Well, there's no evidence, actually, that for a planet being called Nibiru itself. Because if you look up the word Nibiru right now, or anytime you want, you'll find out that it derives from Nippur, which is an ancient city that's about 7,000 years old, give or take. So basically, with Nibiru having been derived from Nippur, it's not a planet, it's a city on Earth. It has nothing to do with a different planet that apparently hasn't been discovered yet. Also, this whole thing about mining gold, they claim that humanity was created to be slaves to mine gold. However, if you look at the Sumerian stories, there is nothing about gold mining in relationship to the gods. But what they have is, they have stories about people being gardeners. So if it's anything, it's to maintain gardens. Had nothing to do with gold. In any case, one can't really prove that actually happened anyway, because these are stories that were written down. There's no kind of evidence ever been writing that any of this happened anyway. But then again, the fact that it doesn't mention anything about gold mining just makes things worse for the average conspiracy theorist that claims that those things are true. Now I want to get back to the thing that I was talking about earlier, and that's the whole thing that they would associate with Enlil and God. I would recommend that to look up the verses, Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 through 9. In Hebrew, it mentions that God is receiving Israel as inheritance from a deity that's pronounced Elyon in the Hebrew. Now, El, that's the other name for Elyon. However, I will also mention that the Hebrew God is also called El himself, because there were different deities called El. I recommend looking up the ancient Semitic religion for more information regarding that, because there's a whole history of information surrounding that historians study all the time. So you have different deities called El Shaddai, and there one called Elyon, or could be called El Elyon. Now, what's important about this is that the Israelite God is specifically referred to as El Shaddai, and not necessarily El Elyon. So that's a completely different God. El actually derives from an earlier word called Il, which is connected to an earlier word called Ilu, which is connected to the deity called Elil, and then the previous one called Elil, and then the previous one called Enlil. So what I'm trying to say is it was a name that was shortened to two very specific letters over the course of several millennia. Now that's a major issue, because this would indicate that Elyon was an attempt, quite obviously an attempt, to pronounce the original name of the El, that is not to be confused with El Shaddai, which is Enlil. Elyon, Enlil. So you have an L, the L sound, an attempt to pronounce the N sound, and then the Yon sound in Hebrew, which is the Lil sound. And what we have going on here is that Enlil is being mentioned as God's father and not God himself, because God is inheriting Israel from Elyon. You read Deuteronomy verses 32, verses 8 through 9. Chapter 32, verses 8 through 9, I meant to say. You'll see that's what's going on here. Now, if you have most English Bibles would not typically transliterate the Hebrew Elyon. They'll usually put in the Most High as the translation of Elyon. And basically, like I was saying, God's inheriting Israel from him. So the simple logic is you can't be you can't be the same person as the one you're inheriting from. That doesn't make any sense. So they're two different beings. And this is like a really big contradiction in Judaism as well, because God isn't supposed to have a father, but he's inheriting Israel in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 through 9. So it's a very big contradiction, and could even, I would even say it's probably the biggest contradiction in Judaism, because they often talk about God has no parents, God created everything, and God chose Israel to be his very specific chosen people. But obviously, since he has a father, and he inherited Israel, it actually contradicts all three of those points. Because how can God be how can God create everything, but he himself have a father? And how can he choose Israel to be his people if he inherited Israel from his father? It makes no sense at all. And he isn't the only God either. So that just makes things like way worse. So basically, you have Enlil and you have God. Now, when you research ancient Semitic religion, you'll see there's a bunch of other deities mentioned aside from the God of Israel, El Shaddai, or Yahweh. And of course, Yahweh is El Son. Now, I like to mention that the whole thing with Yahweh is there's a little bit of problems with using the name Yahweh, because it was based on what is called the Tetragrammaton in Greek, which pretty much means consisting of four. But an older style, at least some suggest an older style, it's supposed to be Yahweh. But that doesn't matter, or does it? Because even if the W sound was there, and you had Yahweh or Yahweh, it resembles the Canaanite deity Hadeh, the storm god. Look that up. It's a son of El in the Canaanite religion. So, and basically, when you take Hadeh, it comes from a deity called Adeh, which comes from a previous deity called Adad. That's a cuneiform deity mentioned in the Mesopotamian cuneiform texts like the Sumerian and Akkadian and whatever. Now, this deity corresponds to the Egyptian to actually three different Egyptian gods: Atum, Aton, and another one called Anhur. Adad is credited for causing floods. Atum in the Egyptian is also credited for doing the same thing. But Aton is where things start to stand out a bit more, because Pharaoh Akhenaten in the 14th century BCE declared him to be the one true God. Now, all other gods are false. Now, that's pretty interesting, because with this etymology I just mentioned, we can connect him directly to the God of Judaism. And even if the etymology of Yahweh and Hadeh did not connect, then we would still be able to connect it anyway for other ways. And what I mean by that is there's other ways to connect him to the Jewish God, not just through the Tetragrammaton. But you have El Shaddai, which comes from the cuneiform Il Shadu, which comes from Il Adu, which comes from Dinger Adad. The Dinger sign is which is similar to to Dias or Deus. They're very similar words. Is the equivalent of ill in this particular situation, but ill is also featured in like I was just mentioning, it's also featured in the cuneiform as well. Now, so you have Adad, Adu, Shadu, and then you have Hadu. All sound alike. You have Aton, Antum, and you have Anhur. They all sound alike. This also includes the Greek god Ares, the Greek god of war. In Rome, they called him Mars, exchanging the E for the M. So now he's Mars. Now, what's interesting is we go to the Romans. This is the aspect of the deity that is the god of Romulus and Remus, the founders of the Roman kingdom. Well, I should say Romulus is actually the founder of the Roman kingdom, but Romulus and Remus are frequently mentioned together. But what's interesting is Romulus killed Remus, and they were brothers. Now, this is very interesting because this is supposed to happen, at least, before the Babylonian captivity. Historically, Judaism, as we know now, in terms of monotheism, at least, did not start until because of the Babylonian captivity. Without the Babylonian captivity, the Jews would not have come to the conclusion that God was in control and that he punished them, because they thought the Babylonian captivity was their punishment for worshiping false gods. So they declared God to be the one true God, and that everyone else is false by that point. And 6th century BC. This is when it was supposed to happen. And the whole thing with Romulus and Remus, if I remember correctly, 8th century BC. Now we see the thing here. Romulus and Remus resembles Cain and Abel in the book of Genesis. Brother kills brother. Very similar story. At Romulus, there's no apparent punishment for him that takes place, if I remember correctly. And for Cain, well, when you read the Genesis story, he's not really punished that much. If you call it what God did to him as a punishment, but it was a very small, minor punishment, because he still he puts a mark on Cain, basically saying that this mark, if I remember correctly, it had something to do with like anyone that strikes him down will have sevenfold vengeance. Anyone that murders Cain will have a sevenfold vengeance. So because that mark is there on Cain, no one's going to kill him. That's basically what's going on there, if I remember correctly. But read it anyway. You'll see that it's a minor punishment either way. And you'll see that it has a strong resemblance to Romulus and Remus. It's really that simple. The point I'm trying to make is, the etymology shows it's directed towards that deity, Adad. It's Adad, Autumn, Aten, or Aton, Anher, Ares, Mars, Hadu. All the same god. But this also includes the Adonai, which is a name frequently used in Judaism. Even now in Rabbinic Judaism, instead of Adonai, they frequently use Hashem, which has a strong resemblance to Hada. Anyway. Well, I pretty much made my point. Research what I was talking about, and you'll see that there's a connection of all these names. This has nothing to do with Enlil. This also is directed against the claim that the God of the Tanakh is based on several different deities combined into one. This is not true at all. Using this etymology, we can determine it was based on one very specific God that had different stories of itself spread out across different cultures, which it converged upon itself and became the God of Judaism.